Texas in the early 19th century was a vast, open land filled with rolling plains, thick forests, and long winding rivers. It belonged to Mexico, which had recently broken free from Spanish rule and was still struggling to organize its new government. Mexico had more land than it had people, and the northern frontier, what is now Texas, was especially empty and vulnerable. Native tribes like the Comanche and Apache dominated the region, and Mexico worried that without more settlers the land could be lost or taken. To strengthen this frontier, Mexican leaders developed a plan: invite foreign settlers, especially from the United States, to move into Texas and farm the land. They believed that these settlers would help develop the region, create towns, defend the area from raids, and contribute to the new nation's economy. It seemed like a practical solution for a young and overstretched government. The people who came from the United States did so under contracts known as Empresario grants. One of the most famous empresarios was Stephen F. Austin, who brought hundreds of families into Texas. These families, often called the Old 300, carved out a living in a rugged land full of promise. They built cabins, planted crops, raised livestock, and tried to create a sense of community in a place that had few established towns. At first, the relationship between these Anglo-American settlers and the Mexican government was peaceful. Mexico welcomed the settlers, offered generous land, and expected loyalty in return. The settlers agreed to follow Mexican laws, learn Spanish, convert to Catholicism, and become Mexican citizens. But reality was more complicated. Many settlers did not learn Spanish, did not convert to Catholicism, and did not fully adapt to Mexican culture. They continued to speak English, maintain Protestant beliefs, and live according to customs familiar to them from their American backgrounds. Mexico, a nation rich with its own traditions and proud of its culture, began to worry that these foreign communities were becoming too independent. They lived far from central authority, and many settlers privately expressed their desire for more self-governance. Some even hoped one day to join the United States. This growing cultural divide created tension that neither side expected. One of the biggest sources of conflict was the issue of slavery. Mexico had abolished slavery, reflecting its values and principles after independence. However, many settlers from the United States, especially from the southern states, brought enslaved people with them to work the cotton farms they set up in Texas. This directly violated Mexican law. Mexico allowed temporary loopholes at first, hoping to avoid upsetting settlers, but over time the government insisted that slavery must end. Many Anglo settlers resisted, feeling their economic survival depended on enslaved labor. This disagreement over slavery deepened the mistrust between the two cultures. As the number of settlers grew, the Mexican government felt its control slipping. In 1830, Mexico passed a law that banned further immigration from the United States. The law also placed more restrictions and taxes on the settlers already living in Texas. Soldiers were sent north to enforce the new rules. The settlers viewed this as unfair and a threat to their way of life. They believed they had worked hard to build Texas and deserved more rights, not more restrictions. Mexico believed it was simply enforcing its sovereignty. Both sides felt justified, yet both misunderstood the other's fears and motivations. Small disputes quickly grew into political conflicts. Settlers held meetings where they discussed independence, greater autonomy, or stronger ties with the United States. Some settlers pushed for peaceful petitioning, while others believed only armed resistance could protect their rights. On the Mexican side, leaders saw these meetings as the beginning of rebellion. To them, Texas was part of Mexico, and foreign settlers had no right to demand changes to Mexican law. The situation became a cycle of fear and distrust. The more Mexico tightened its rules, the more the settlers resisted. The more settlers resisted, the more Mexico acted to assert control. By the early 1830s, Mexico was dealing with internal turmoil. Governments rose and fell quickly, and political chaos rippled across the nation. General Santa Anna rose to power with promises of restoring order, but he soon adopted stronger centralized control. He abolished some local governing rights, not just in Texas but across Mexico. Many regions resisted, and Texas became one of the most vocal opponents. Settlers argued that Santa Anna's actions violated the federal principles Mexico had been founded upon. Tejanos, Mexican-born residents of Texas, also joined in the criticism. They, too, wanted regional autonomy and felt the central government was ignoring their needs. Tension finally erupted into open conflict in 1835. At Gonzales, Mexican soldiers attempted to retrieve a small cannon that had been given to settlers for defense against native raids. The settlers refused to hand it over. They raised a flag that boldly displayed the cannon and the words, "Come and take it." When shots were fired, the Texas Revolution began. What had started as political disagreements transformed into a struggle that would reshape the future of the region. As fighting spread, towns throughout Texas took sides. Rebels seized Mexican garrisons, took control of key settlements, and declared their intent to defend their rights. Tejanos like Juan Seguin joined the settlers, believing that Santa Anna's centralization threatened all Texans, regardless of background. Meanwhile, Mexico viewed these actions as unlawful rebellion. Santa Anna gathered his army and marched north with determination to crush the uprising. The stage was set for a conflict filled with sacrifice, shifting alliances, and dramatic battles. Part 1 ends with Texas in open rebellion, Mexico determined to regain control, and both sides convinced they were defending their rightful future. The land that once seemed a peaceful opportunity for mutual benefit had become the center of a struggle over identity, law, and sovereignty. The fall of the Alamo in March 1836 changed everything in Texas. Before the siege, many settlers still believed the conflict with Mexico might end through negotiation or a limited series of skirmishes. But the brutal 13-day battle, where fewer than 200 defenders held out against thousands of Mexican soldiers, shattered those hopes. The men inside the old mission, frontiersmen, volunteers, Tejanos, and adventurers, fought with extraordinary determination, even though they knew reinforcements were unlikely. When Santa Anna's army finally stormed the walls on the morning of March 6, every defender was killed. The news spread rapidly, bringing grief, outrage, and fear to all corners of Texas. Families packed their belongings and hurried eastward, fleeing before the advancing Mexican columns. This desperate evacuation became known as the Runaway Scrape. Mothers carried children through muddy roads, wagons broke in swollen rivers, and entire towns emptied almost overnight. What little stability Texas had crumbled, replaced by panic and uncertainty. But the Alamo did something else as well. It created a powerful symbol. The defenders' sacrifice ignited a unity that had not existed before. Settlers who had previously been divided over politics or hesitant about fighting now felt a deep sense of duty to continue the struggle. The phrase, "Remember the Alamo," was repeated across every village, camp, and gathering place. It was more than a slogan, it was a reminder of courage, honor, and the cost of freedom. Yet even as Texans mourned the Alamo, another tragedy soon hardened their resolve even further. Only 3 weeks after the fall of the Alamo, Texan Colonel James Fannin and his men surrendered near Goliad after a series of miscommunications and failed attempts to escape Mexican forces. They did so under the belief that they would be treated honorably as prisoners of war. Instead, Santa Anna ordered their execution. Nearly 400 Texan prisoners were marched out in groups, shot, and left on the field. A few escaped, but the majority were killed without mercy. When news of the Goliad massacre reached the settlers, it ignited outrage unlike anything seen before. Even those who had previously doubted the rebellion could not ignore the brutality. The deaths at Goliad convinced many that Santa Anna's campaign was not merely military but aimed at crushing Texas through fear and absolute force. The fight became not just political or territorial, but deeply personal. During these dark weeks, Texan Commander Sam Houston was making decisions that would shape the course of the conflict. Unlike other leaders who sought immediate confrontation, Houston chose patience. He understood that the Texan forces were outnumbered, poorly supplied, and not yet trained enough to face the full Mexican army. His decision to retreat angered many. Settlers believed he was abandoning them, and some even called for his removal. But Houston remained firm. He believed that drawing Santa Anna deeper into Texas, stretching his supply lines, and buying time would give the rebels their best chance of winning. As families fled east, Houston's army shadowed the Mexican advance, waiting for the right moment to strike. While Santa Anna pushed forward, he grew increasingly confident. The victories at the Alamo and Goliad convinced him that Texas resistance would crumble. He divided his army into smaller units to chase rebels and prevent their escape, a decision that would ultimately weaken his force. Santa Anna believed the Texans were disorganized and demoralized, and he underestimated Houston's strategy and growing troop strength. As Houston continued his retreat eastward, volunteers from across Texas and even from the United States joined his army. Some wanted revenge for the Alamo, others sought justice for Goliad, and many simply refused to live under the rule of a leader who had shown such cruelty. By mid-April, Houston learned that Santa Anna had taken a position near the San Jacinto River, hoping to cut off Texan movement. The location was a wide field bordered by marshes, forests, and the deep waters of the river. Santa Anna believed the Texans would continue retreating, so he allowed his men to rest in the afternoon heat. His camp was poorly guarded, his soldiers scattered, and many were sleeping. Houston studied the terrain and realized this was the moment he had been waiting for. The Mexican camp was vulnerable, and for the first time in months, the Texans were not the ones on the run. On the afternoon of April 21, 1836, Houston ordered the attack. The Texans advanced quietly through the tall grass, carrying rifles, pistols, and whatever weapons they could gather. When they were close enough, Houston shouted the commands, and the Texans charged with fury. Their battle cries filled the air, "Remember the Alamo," and "Remember Goliad," reminding every man of the sacrifices that had led them to this moment. The Mexican soldiers, caught by surprise, had no time to form proper lines or prepare a defense. The attack was overwhelming. In just 18 minutes, the Texan forces shattered Santa Anna's army. Many Mexican soldiers were killed or captured, while others fled in panic into the nearby marshes. Santa Anna himself tried to escape, exchanging his uniform for that of a common soldier. But he was soon captured and brought before Houston. The meeting between these two leaders marked a turning point in North American history. Weak, shaken, and humiliated, Santa Anna agreed to sign the treaties of Velasco, promising to end the fighting, withdraw Mexican troops, and recognize the independence of Texas. Though the Mexican government would later deny the validity of the treaty, the agreement effectively ended the Texas Revolution. With the victory at San Jacinto, Texas emerged as an independent nation, the Republic of Texas. The new republic faced enormous challenges: an unstable economy, ongoing threats from Mexico, border disputes, and the difficulties of governing a vast and diverse land. Yet the people of Texas were filled with pride and determination. They had defeated a much larger and better equipped army through courage, sacrifice, and strategic leadership. They elected Sam Houston as their first president, raised their own flag, and established a government that reflected their belief in freedom and self-rule. For almost a decade, Texas stood on its own. But many Texans wanted to join the United States, believing it would bring economic stability and military protection. At the same time, the U.S. government was drawn to the idea of expanding westward, guided by a belief in manifest destiny, the idea that the United States was meant to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The victory at San Jacinto made this possible. Without that decisive moment, Texas might have remained under Mexican control or become too weak to survive independently. Thus, the events of 1836, marked by tragedy, courage, and strategic brilliance, shaped the destiny of Texas and changed the future of North America forever.